Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. This is going to be the continuation of Psychedelics Part 1, which, if you haven't seen it, we did that on Thursday. Ooh, nice little propped up with the shirt there. I like it. And while Chad is smashing his shirt, make sure you smash the like button, hit the subscribe, do the notification bell. That will get you your email in the morning. And if you really enjoy the show, share it with others. That is always helpful too. Um, as you guys know, none of us are doctors except for Dr. Dave, but not that kind
I'm
of
not that
doctor,
kind.
different kind of doctor. So anything we do say, it is our own personal experience and anecdotal evidence from our own lives. So do your research. If you hear anything on this that kind of makes you think about something, do some research. Again, I will put some links into the comments as they come up, or correction, the description afterwards as they come up. But if you have any comments or questions, by all means, throw them up in the comment section and we will be able to put them on the screen and discuss them as we go. Any thoughts or things going on right off the top of your guys' head before we dive into the subject at hand? Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, then let's get into Psychedelics Part 2. And we wanted to start with psychedelic safety. That's going to be the focus for the first portion of this, and then we'll get into the rest of the conversation. But Dave, let's start with you.
Yeah, man.
Let's go into some psychedelic safety concerns and information, stuff like that, and then we'll hit Chad and carry on down the line.
Cool.
Giver.
So yeah, as it pertains to this stuff, I don't want to sound like we're putting the hammer down and like trying to prevent anyone from getting into this, but it is important stuff to mention. The way I see it, there's kind of three considerations for this stuff. Number one is like pharmacological interactions. So if you're someone who's on antidepressants already, chiefly like SSRIs, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, do not play nicely with large doses of psychedelics. Definitely ayahuasca, psilocybin has some influence there as well. Basically, it's like actually really unsafe potentially to do that. So that's like a hard no for doing ayahuasca if you're on that stuff. Doesn't mean it's not in your future. You can wean off of it, but something to point out. Generally speaking, microdosing psilocybin is pretty much safe for anyone in terms of drug interactions because you're working with such a low dose. So that's kind of number one hard contraindication. SSRIs don't play nicely with large doses of these things. Number two is sort of your own mental health and where you're at now. So obviously, people with mental health issues are coming to seek these things. However, if you're someone who already has a pretty tenuous grasp on reality, playing with your perception of reality is a good way to get yourself in trouble. So that's really referring to anyone who is or might be diagnosed with schizophrenia primarily. There's some considerations with the diagnosis of like borderline personality disorder as well. Basically anything, like I said, where your grasp on reality is already questionable, we might not want to push you over that edge and have you kind of lose touch with reality. It's a thing that can happen. That's not to say with those diagnoses it's impossible. A lot of times I've actually seen borderline personality disorder being diagnosed kind of questionably, right? It's like the doctor doesn't really have a better explanation for things and they just kind of put a label on symptoms. So again, it's not to say that this isn't for you if you have that diagnosis, but just again, something to be aware of. Last kind of category of this is your own physical safety in the setting that you're going to. I wish I could say that people who work with plant medicine were all great people, but they're just people, and some of them are predatory people. So this is a real thing to watch out for if you're going to go do a psilocybin ceremony or a journey or an ayahuasca retreat. It's just like, who are the people running this thing? I've heard horror stories of sexual assault happening on these retreats. You're putting yourself in a very vulnerable position by engaging with these substances, and you want to make sure you're not in anywhere that someone might take advantage of you. Obviously, it's a little bit more of a thing for women to worry about, but for men too, like you don't want to get, I don't know, robbed at some retreat that you're going to. You want to know the people that you're going into this with. You want to feel safe. Feeling safe is going to only allow for a deeper journey, but you got to really know and trust and respect the people that you're going to be with, because you're entrusting them with your well-being while you're in a really vulnerable state. So those are kind of the three categories I wanted to hit on, and I'll quit rambling and let somebody else speak. But
No, it's all good.
Wanted to make sure we hit that.
Absolutely, those are solid points. Chad, you got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, just the mentioning of the SSRIs. I kind of go back to where I started with this, and again, ketamine was my catalyst to this area. And at the time, right, I looked into psilocybin retreats and things of that nature, but I was on 150 milligrams of Effexor, right? And a lot of them were like, okay, you're still too crazy to come hang out to do psychedelics. Like, we got to get you right first. But ketamine was that entry point, right? I was still on SSRIs. I did the ketamine therapy. And then once I found like good footing for myself and I understood my foundation, I understood my headspace and where I was, then I started coming off these meds, from 150 down to the 75, down to the 37.5. And at that point, at the 37.5, still on Effexor, there was somebody that would work with me while I was on that low dose, and I did a psilocybin. And during that, I essentially the next day got completely off all SSRIs, and I've been off them now for almost a year. So ketamine is what got me to help get off the SSRIs. And I literally just kind of did this by myself, which I don't recommend. I was in a solid spot, right? I knew what I was getting into. I knew if I was going to be moody or whatnot, I give the wife and friends and family, hey, if I'm a little off, this is what's going on. So I kind of set up some roadblocks where if I was falling off the cliff too much, someone could kind of say, hey dude, like maybe get back on the SSRIs. So that's the thing too, is I think having a strong group and mentioning your intentions with these things, it's going to help facilitate, finding that foundation. So that was kind of where I started on all this journey.
I like it. Shaun, you got any thoughts safety wise? No, all good. Okay. Rob, any thoughts or questions so far?
No, I think all the points are perfect. The only thing I'd reinforce is that interactions piece. And I'll target the day-to-day person, because I think in modern society, the day-to-day person doesn't ever really consider drug interactions, even though we're surrounded by drugs. We're too used to Tylenol, we're too used to ibuprofen, we're too used to sinus medication. Like the number of people I come across, and we're talking one-on-one level stuff here, guys. Don't drink and take acetaminophen. Just don't do it. And the amount of people I've come across that are so willy-nilly about that, and then to start talking about, hey, let's ingest some drugs that actually target my brain. We're talking, it can't be reinforced enough. But I think David and Chad did a perfect job of everything else.
Yeah, the the interesting thing about safety is that it almost seems like it's too much or not enough. It never really feels like there's a right amount of safety. You know what I mean? But I think it's, again, really want to harp on this, I guess, is to do the research, right? Understand what you're actually doing. And this isn't and I wanted to touch on this from what Dave was saying, is that none of these things are, it's not a recreational time. Right. This isn't, and to the points that you guys brought up in the fact that, you want to get off of things in order to do these retreats or doses or anything like that, is the fact that you need to be in the right state to engage in them, if that makes sense. And so what do you guys think about, how would you encourage others, I guess, to find that right state first and then go from there?
If I can, real quick, and I'll make this as brief as possible because of the background noise here in the cafe. Something that Rob had brought up, and I just want to build off of that, and then maybe David can take over and etc. So when I was on my first 24-hour solo mountain bike race, another pro racer had convinced me that I needed some sort of pain management during the 24 hours, which I had never really required before. And I believed him that I might need about hour 18 or hour 20 or whatever. So he convinced me that I should take some Tylenol. And of course, I was racing on liquid nutrition and coffee. And as it turns out, that combination of that corrosive effect in my gut, combined with going mega hard for 24 hours, the next day I was in emergency with internal bleeding. And so I've been able to use that, that little example with a lot of my athletes to say, hey, listen, it's not just about the Tylenol. It's about the Tylenol in conjunction with liquid nutrition. And then that's in conjunction with hard effort consistently for 24 hours nonstop while your body, your mind, and all things are under a stress load that you may never have faced before. So I'm going to bounce out of here real quick, but I just want to establish that to say now, please, fellas, take over and let's start talking about how this combined with that combined with, oh, you've never thought that before, as a totality is where some negative impact happens.
Absolutely. Dave or Chad, you want to jump on that?
It sounds like Dave's got something there.
He does. He looks like he's pondering something. Yeah.
I was pondering something. What I was pondering is that actually what you bring up, you said that like maybe the combination of all these factors is potentially where people can go wrong. And I agree. But I think it's also potentially where you can go really right when you recognize that. So Chad, I actually really want to hear more about your experience of coming off of the SSRIs, because it sounds like you knew what was, like you almost anticipated the pitfalls you could have fallen into and kind of set up some safeguards.
Yeah.
And I always tell people who are interested in coming off of this stuff, especially with microdosing, I want to establish a baseline of microdosing first before we start tweaking any other variable. And even before that, I want to establish a baseline of better habits like we talked about last time, like sleep, nutrition, hydration, exercise. So let's figure out who you are when you're checking those boxes. And then let's figure out who you are with a microdose. And then we can start to figure out who you are without some of these psychotropic drugs in your system. But I think it's really important to just go very slow and kind of recognizing the amount of variables that we're tweaking and trying to isolate them and not trying to do everything all at once. Because as Shaun said, it's the combination of factors that trips people up. And so we can kind of use that to our advantage and try to isolate one factor at a time. And with everyone I've worked with, that's proved to be a really important thing. But I've never personally come off of this stuff. So Chad, I'm interested to hear how that played into your experience.
Yeah, 100%, and stop me at any time. A lot of different variables. For me, like like Rob said, there's a lot of average Joes out there, right? That just they don't know that this stuff can actually help them when used correctly. And for me, I was that guy. I was that average Joe. The woes me. It's everyone else's fault. Like I was in a bad place for 20 plus years. I lived numb. Chance and I kind of talked about it prior of just being dads that sat on the couch. Right? We didn't play with our boys. We were just living life. And I knew at that rock bottom there had to be a change. There had to be a different set of rules that I could have raised the standard. So started the ketamine and slowly started coming off of the SSRIs at 150 milligrams. And what I noticed what ketamine helped me really notice is past thought patterns or past just repetition of what I would do. I would get someplace and I would self-sabotage, right? Like I would try to go all in. Like I haven't benched, use a really easy analogy, I guess, I haven't benched in like 2 years, but yet I'm going in there and trying to bench 250, right off the bat because I see all these other dudes doing it. So I think I can do it. Right. So what ketamine did for me is it allowed me to kind of reset the base of like, hey man, like let's learn to walk that mile first before we start jogging that mile. And so then it was a competition with myself as opposed to everybody else that was surrounded me. And so then coming off the 150 to the 75, now I'm in the gym. Right now I'm working out 5-6 times a day. On top of that, I'm eating right. On the other thing, now I'm drinking a gallon of water a day, right? Doesn't sound a lot, but you go from where I was to now making these small adjustments that are now routines in my life. That's when I felt, okay, now I've got a stronger foundation. Now I can come off of, the 75 to the 37.5. And same thing, each time I would come down, I would add like something else, whether it was a little bit of breath work throughout the week or a little bit of meditation, right? But that big jump going from 150 to 75 was a train wreck. It hurt. There was, I swear to God, there was probably almost a week I barely could get out of bed. My body hurt so bad coming off that jump. that I was, I had night sweats. I would be shaking in bed. I didn't eat. It was rough, and I knew it was going to be rough. But same thing. I had a supportive wife. I had friends around me that kind of knew, okay, he's going through this stuff. Let's check in on him. And then once I got through the rough part of that 150 drop to that 75, I kind of realized about a month in, like, okay, I can do this, right? Like this is sustainable. I went through the roughest part. All right, now let's go on to journey point, 2.0, I guess.
I like that. It's you bring up a really great point in that it's it's really good to have a support system, right? In any of these things, if you're dealing with not only physical health but mental health and dealing with coming off of like withdrawal symptoms and stuff like that, if you don't have the support, it's going to be twice as hard, right?
Yeah.
And to have that family there and to have your friends checking in on you and things like that, these things are all totally doable. It's a little bit easier when you have that support.
Yeah, and I think just changing your thought pattern overall, right? If I missed the gym for 2 days in a row, I would just destroy myself mentally, right? And from there, then it was a slippery slope. But instead of that, now it's like, okay, dude, you missed 2 days of the gym, but what did you do? Oh, you walked over 20,000 steps. You've worked 15 hours at your booth in the Denver conference. Like, now I have the emotional intelligence in my head to tell myself, like, you're still outputting quite a bit. You're not in the gym, so just swap those things, right? So instead of beating yourself up for, days and weeks and months on end, now my bad days are, 24 hours, if not just hours, because I can recognize those and know, okay, I need to go out in the sun. I need to go for a run. I need to go to the gym. I need to implement something quickly so I can get over this hump. And that's literally what ketamine has done for me in psychedelic. It's allowed me to change my entire thought process and have some internal verbiages with myself before reacting, to where before it was just an automatic react.
Yeah. Chance,
Go ahead.
if I could just highlight that
Give her.
for a quick second. That is going back to, I think, my answer from last time we talked. That is the essence of what psychedelics give you right there, where Chad went from, I missed the gym 2 days in a row, therefore I am completely worthless, to
Yep.
I missed the gym 2 days in a row, period, end of sentence. Like, it just happened. That's it. It doesn't reflect who I am in any way. And in fact, I can look at all this other stuff that I've done and I can feel pretty good about it. So I just wanted to highlight that, because that to me is like all of this stuff in a nutshell, is disassociating the identity and the worthless identity from just the fact of the matter of how things have been.
That is a great highlight. You got any thoughts so far?
I do have a quick observation or a question, or just to dig a little bit deeper into it. Chad, you'd said that, if this, then that, and that was you beat yourself up. And I'm trying to understand what that means to you by beating yourself up. How would you categorize that? Because then it's important to establish, if that was your baseline, beating yourself up, the delta between beating yourself up to, oh, now I'm doing quite well. Is it as simple a binary construct as I was super bummed, now I'm kind of happy? Or did you establish that?
Yeah, I think there was all kinds. Man, as far as establishing that, I think just over time, like getting rid of the BS, right? Like I removed myself from certain walks of life, if you want to say that. I didn't plug myself into regular everyday media, things of that nature, to try to change that. From a social media standpoint, I started following different people, right, that I could get little nuggets from and kind of plug those into the thought process of like, oh, like, okay, it's 2 days. That's right. We'll make it up with X, Y, and Z. And the beat up part for me was just constant. You're a loser, right? You're a loser. You're a bum. You're always going to fail. Oh, I'm hungry now because I'm bored. Let me go to the pantry and destroy a bag of Doritos. And oh, there's 6 cupcakes here. Let me eat those 6 cupcakes because I get that dopamine rush and that mouth pleasure of sugar, right? Now I look at sugar. Now I look at junk food in a completely different context. If I have a cupcake, now I'm like, okay, you owe yourself at least a 3 or 4 mile run if you're going to do that. Or I look at the cupcake and go, that's a stall for me. That's a road blockage I don't need. It's going to lack me from getting ahead and push my goals further down the road. So it's been a massive process, but in probably last year, it's really picked up as far as changing how I look at things and recategorizing them completely different. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Rob or Dave, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll actually jump in on that. I'm going to piggyback on Shaun's question and then Chad's awesome answer. So I'm victim of this too. So it's something I've worked on for the last couple of years. This idea, like, we use these cliche sort of phrases now, I guess, in the circles. And that is like, it's a bad day, not a bad life, all that sort of stuff. Right. But I was that guy. Like, and the problem was, it wasn't just like some state of mind where it's like, today sucks, so therefore Rob sucks forever. It was rooted in one very thing, one very specific thing, and that's comparisons. And the problem I just started to discover, this is sort of like what Chad said, he started to pick and choose what he consumed. I don't mean like food wise, like, if we're all on doom scrolling on social media, like, who are we ingesting, right? And the tricky part I found was this, is that everyone loves to go and say social media today and get so motivated, right? Like they watch Jocko just motivate the crap out of you as the next Navy SEAL, or David Goggins, or whoever you choose to follow. That's like, yeah, go tear it up, flip the world upside down, go crush things, right? Yeah, just like Shaun. But Shaun, you do crush things, so I'm good with that. But at the end of the day, you think that that's positive, right? But if you're in a place where you need that motivation, and that's why you're, the dopamine that hit you're getting when you're scrolling through that stuff, like, you might just take it as like motivation. But a brain in this mode, what it's really doing behind the scenes is going, man, I'm super motivated, but that guy's done so much more than I have. You know what I mean? Like, and you return to it every single day thinking like, oh, I'm getting super hyped and I'm going to do more push-ups, right? But secretly your subconscious is going, I'm never going to be that. I'm never, ever, ever, ever going to be that. And at some point in time, like, it becomes kind of a downward spiral of like, it really is. It's like, because today in 30 seconds, I can see 17 people being super motivated about their achievements. In 17 years, I won't achieve as much. So what does that mean for me? Right? Like, it's a dangerous game to play. And I think we get trapped in the positivity of the message gets lost really to our brain. And what we really walk away with is this, I'm comparing myself to everything and everyone. And therefore a bad day is a bad life. It's a bad forever. Right. And you kind of have to get away from that sort of mindset of comparisons. I think that's the hinge point for me, was the comparative nature of my brain.
Yeah. Do you think that, well, let's ask Dave, does psychedelics help remove that comparison, or at least disengage you from that comparison setup? I see Chad nodding his head like Matt.
Yeah. I mean, I'm jumping in there on this one because it just resonates so much. Right. And I'll use jiu-jitsu. Right. We got a bunch of rollers on this podcast, minus myself. Right. And I would always compare myself like, oh, I'm not doing jiu-jitsu, I'm a bum. Right. But then I realized, oh, I'm launching an apparel company. I'm putting a ruck march together. I'm trying to learn guitar. I'm a father of 2 under 6, like, there's all these. And so I get to that point of like, that will be something I will do eventually. But right now is not the time. To where before I used to try to cram all this stuff on top, and I could never be a master of any of them. Right. Because I was just diving in, little toes here and there. So my big things is I want to play guitar and I want to be a really good golfer. Right. Those are the things I'm focusing on outside of the apparel and everything else. So it's like giving myself that bandwidth. Right. And like Rob said, the comparison, like not comparing myself in those arenas. And I know there's those average Joes that are sitting on the couch right now and they're looking at a Goggins or, same thing or whatever. And they're beating themselves up because they haven't ran in Death Valley at 140 degrees, at 100 miles. Okay, man, like that dude's been doing this forever. Like, you've got to give yourself some bandwidth to be able to walk first.
Well, the one thing I'll jump in and add just sort of before David jumps in on this is that's the insidious part of this too. Right, Chad? Is that like, not only are we not what we're comparing ourselves to, that mere act of comparison makes our brains forget all the other crap that we are actually doing. Like it's weird.
I do want to throw this in right before. Sorry, David. I'm going to come to you right away. Is that, Chad, you're right. There are a lot of dudes sitting on the couch comparing themselves, saying, "Oh, I'm not doing that." but they're on the couch. They should be doing something, right? And I do want to reiterate that is that there is some bandwidth that you got to give yourself. You know, you're not that person, you're not, but you do need to be yourself, and you do need to be doing something. And there was many years in my life that I spent sitting on the couch going like, oh well, you know, I was still, you know, I'm not that guy, but I'm still pretty hard while I was eating a bag of chips, right? and I wanted to bring that up because you do need to actually be doing something at a bare minimum. Dave, thoughts?
Those are all great points. And Chad, the one thing that your subconscious was right about is you are a bum for not training, but that's okay. We still love you. Chance, to your question of like, do psychedelics do that for you? I know Chad was nodding his head yes. I would say no, not by themselves, because as Rob was explaining that, I've actually never really thought about it that way before. Like, it's easy to, like, we know comparison is the thief of joy, but looking at someone for motivation, I'd never really realized until you just articulated that kind of how insidious it is. And it reminds me of when I started my own physical therapy business. I unfollowed every single other physical therapist that I knew, because I didn't want what they were doing to influence what I was going to do. I just wanted to do my best in my own way, and I didn't want to be even subconsciously comparing myself to them. And I think a similar thing here applies, actually, where if your business is getting your life in order and your business is improving things, you don't need to be looking at what everyone else is doing. You only need to be looking at what can I be doing better right now. Every moment, do your best every day, right? That's the idea. It's not every moment look at what everyone else is doing their best and think about that. It's just think about what can I do. So no, I don't think psychedelics do that by itself, because I never even realized that until today. So
there you go.
Yeah,
Shaun, sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I think psychedelics just in a whole, it just opens up your brain, right, to
Sure.
look at things from a different perspective. You know, we make that couch analogy. I was that guy. Like, you would hear the guys, you just got to walk around the block. And I'm like, walk around the block. Tired, bro. I'm chilling. I'm watching whatever I want to watch. But now knowing that exercise and diet and all this stuff, you know, creates a better lifestyle on top of everything else I'm doing, you know, yeah, go take that walk around the block. Like you said, you've got to do something. But for me, I was stuck in such a rut that it was the psychedelics that allowed me to look at things from a different perspective. Say, yeah, I can walk around the block today, maybe 2 blocks tomorrow. And that's what I mean. Like, you got to start, and then you got to realize, like, you can build upon that. Like, I didn't realize I could build upon that. I realized I got to run a marathon tomorrow, even though I haven't ran in 10 years. You know, like, what am I doing to myself? Like, come on, dude, you're not there. So it was mental humps, and psychedelics got me over those mental humps.
Yeah, dude, I think this is a perfect example of this point, actually, that the mushrooms don't fix you. The ketamine didn't fix you. The ketamine didn't make you go to the gym. It put you in the state of mind where that was within reason for you. So this stuff doesn't work if you don't also work. It's not just a pill that's going to fix everything. It's a pill that is going to help you to fix everything for yourself. But I think that ought to be kind of the main driving message here. It's at the end of the day, it's still on you. Just like you said, Chance, like, you still got to get off the couch.
Yeah, I love that.
Shaun, you had a thought?
I do. I just want to be careful, and I know no one has led anyone off the path yet, but I do believe that psychedelics expand your awareness, expand your consciousness, expand you as a energetic being. But you've got to understand what you're expanding into. And so if you enter into that expansion with, I'm going to be super gentle with myself, and I'm not going to walk a block. I'm just going to walk out my door and then step back into my house. That's one way to approach it. I would call that one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is, okay, now I'm going to get after it and I'm going to freaking smash. And that's my way. And that is not for everyone. But you have to understand the extremes of life to encourage you to figure out where you fit in between those two extremes. And I would suggest that most people, once they start expanding into their awesomeness, they tend to hang out in the middle area of not too hot and not too cold, just like the Three Bears and the porridge. And so you got to figure out how you like your porridge. And that's not, you shouldn't take that into consideration as, oh, it'll just figure itself out. Give a little bit of intention as to what you want out of the psychedelics, what you can visualize for your future, and what feels right to you inside of you, and then go explore that. Don't limit yourself to, nah, you know what? Everyone says that you've got to start with just only walking a block. I don't believe that to be true at all. Never limit yourself in life. If it feels like you want to go run in Death Valley, freaking go run in Death Valley. And if at some point around mile 3 you say, okay, that's for me, I'll give it a try tomorrow or next year. Well, that's a whole different conversation that we really have to keep in mind. Never limit yourself to anything I say or anyone on this panel says or your neighbor says. You go do you, maximum.
And the mic drop happens in the coffee shop. You're gonna go buy yourself another mic. Oh, man.
This is now the shortest episode of the collective.
Well, we had one with was it Pat Mack was on a couple days ago, and he dropped a bomb. Like, it's the first line, and we were like, well, okay.
Yeah, actually, I walked out of my hotel room.
Yeah, he was just like, I'm out.
Well, I mean, what Shaun says there, right? I mean, when I see Goggins and all these other guys, right? I'm not the Navy SEAL, but I see them running, or I see them doing something, and now the thought process in my head is, well, why not me? Like, I just have to put the effort in, I have to put a plan in, and I have to follow that, right? Like, why not me? And so instead of boo-hooing, it's a why not meaning. Like, why can't I achieve that? Sure, there's work to be done. I can do it, but you have to put in that work, you know. So that's what's helped me. It's why not me? Why can't I do that as well?
And to quickly reinforce that point, when I was in Victoria, sorry, Dave,
okay.
I was sitting down on a bench having a chat with a young fella, and when we started off the conversation, he was a bit starstruck. He considered me a mentor and an idol and all of that good stuff. And I was more uncomfortable than he was in that moment as he was telling me that. But I just looked him straight in the eye and said, hey, man, do you think I'm any different than you? Do you think I'm any better than you? Do you think you're less than me? Do you not understand what is going on right now? We're just two energetic beings. We're just two dudes. You consider it whatever term you want, but I am different than anyone on this panel. As long as you on this panel, or you out there listening, believe, and that's what you got to do, is you got to believe that you're more than what you are right now. And if you feel that, if you hear what I just said, if you want to be more than what you are right now, it's now your responsibility to figure out how to become that more. Now we're right back to psychedelics and how that can possibly provide that.
Dave?
I wanted to pull the thread on something else that Shaun said there, which was that you have to know what you're expanding into. And you have to be able to have a vision of what your future, like what you want your future to look like. It doesn't have to play out exactly that way, but you got to be steering the ship a little bit. And to tie it back to, stuff like looking at Goggins, I don't want to run 100 miles in Death Valley. Like, I never want to do that. It sounds terrible. And importantly, how does he, I don't know this, but how does he show up as a father? How does he show up as a husband? Is he able to help people who come to him, or is all of his effort going into that running? And not to put that down, but Chad, like what you said, why not me? The why not me doesn't have to be, why can't I do exactly that? The why not me has to be, why can't I do my absolute best at what I choose to? So for you, you're running 140 miles through the desert in the equivalent of being a father and starting an apparel company. You should strive to be the absolute best at that. And I think that this is something that gets overlooked, actually, is having a vision that you have authored for yourself. I had a call this morning with a woman who just signed up with us. And our intake process involves asking a lot of these questions. And it took her 2 days to fill out this intake form with a lot of tears involved, because she realized she's 46 years old and has 2 daughters and never once spent a moment thinking about what she wants to do with her life. And this is where our program begins, is taking stock of where you are now and starting to develop an idea of where you want to actually get to. So it is an important thing to bring up as it pertains to psychedelics, but just in life is like, yeah, you're trying to get better, but to what end? Do you want to do 1,000 pull-ups in one day, or do you just want to be a better mother? Do you want to run through the desert and do one of these ultra marathons, or do you just want to pursue an actual hobby that you've been too afraid to get into for 20 years? So knowing what you're expanding into is vitally important. And tying it back to the comparison, like the thing I'm expanding into is not what Jocko's expanding into. It's not what David Goggins is expanding into, but it's my purpose here on this earth that I'm going to expand into.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Robbie,
and just to
sorry.
put an exclamation mark on that excellent overview, I said to the fellow that I was talking to yesterday for a couple of hours, "Why are you here, man? Why are you here?" And he said, "What, like right here on this park bench?" And I said, "No. Why do you exist? Why are you existing with me right now in this moment? Why are we vibing? Why are you here in existence?" And he'd never thought of that. I think it's a pretty important question.
Well, I mean, you've said it many times on this show. Sit down, write down on a piece of paper why, and then don't get up until you have the reason, and then the plan comes after that, and then so on and so forth. So, but you're, yeah, absolutely right. Rob, did you have any thoughts so far?
No, that was great statements. You
You
got me.
Yeah. Chad, or has anybody got any thoughts so far on anything we've gone? Because,
yeah, I mean,
go
I
ahead,
get that gentleman that was sitting next to Shaun. I was that gentleman, right? Like, and so, like I kind of told you before, Chance, like, I've ran into a lot of those folks that are super arrogant and they don't challenge you in productive ways, and so
Mhm.
that's why I appreciate, everything Shaun brings to the table and all the guys on here and, all the other guests you guys have, because I'm learning from it, right? From each nugget each individual has or their experience, I'm adding it to my experience so I can grow as an individual. And like David said, sometimes I wonder, like, why am I this stay-at-home dad doing this apparel gig and raising 2 boys? And then I kind of stop and reflect of, well, your apparel company's probably going to take off, and this is you building a strong bond with your boys now, because maybe you're going to be gone and you're going to be traveling and you got to be doing this stuff. So you're building that bond now. So when I'm doing that, they understand what's going on. So that's what I mean by even looking further down the road or reflecting on certain times that I have now that, like I said before, like someone would say, live in the present, dude. I'm like, live in the present? Like, I've got all this stuff going on in my head. What do you mean live in the present? And like Shaun says, what are you doing now? Why are you existing? Why are you here? And so now I feel I've got some of those answers via the psychedelic realm.
What do you,
I do think it's important for me to add this so that we're all super clear on where I'm at in my life. As I said to that young fella, "Hey man, do you think I'm any different from you in that dark space? You think that I've never been in that dark space before? I don't want to contextualize how dark my space was against your dark space, but in order for me to move down the path, I had to start at a dark space to understand how far I've come so that I better verbalize or better insert the idea into other people's minds that if you start to understand where you're at and look forward in a positive trajectory and stay on that path, at one point in your life, you'll be able to look way, way back into the past and see how far you've come. And now you have the privilege of explaining that to someone else, aiding someone else in moving out of that dark space because you were in that dark space yourself. And as I said a little bit earlier, and I didn't want to get into the nuances of it, I'm no different than anyone else who's been in the darkness. I'm no different than anyone who's struggled. I've struggled. And I think to really understand human beings, you've got to see the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs. And I've seen both. And that helps me keep context when I'm standing in front of that other human being, looking them in the eyes and better understand them. Perhaps.
That's a great word there, context. And I think that we can take our lives, we can take other lives, we can use comparison and all these things, but we can take it out of context and just apply it to whatever it is we want to apply it to, rather than understanding what actually is. There was you brought up a good point, Shaun, in that, in order to understand the whole, you kind of have to have been in the whole. In order to teach others how to get through that, you kind of need to understand it to begin with. And we were talking another day about when I had Corey over, and we were talking about digging trenches, right? We had this whole story on the show, but when I brought up trenches, my wife thought of gardening. When I thought of trenches, I thought of like digging trenches in the ground. And when Corey thought of digging trenches, it was totally different. And then when Shaun, I brought it up to Shaun, his concept of what trenches were is a whole nother concept, because the experience is different. And the context being the same, the experience is different. And so I think that's an important thing to bring up in terms of, mental health or betterment, or getting into any type of therapy, is understanding your own context to understand exactly where you are. Because if you don't know that, then you can sit in a hole and you can start decorating the hole. And you're like, wow, this is a nice looking hole, right? This is pretty cool. It's not too bad. And I got a window and I can see the sky, right? You can make that hole your life if you don't understand the fact that that is an actual hole. There's so much more out there, right? So I think that I just wanted to bring that up because it was digging in my mind. Now, let's get back into psychedelics here. What would you recommend for those just beginning the journey? Let's start at the beginning here. We've talked about safety. We've talked about, how to kind of engage it. But once somebody engages it, what's the path? What do you think?
I think each person has their own path. I don't think a recommendation or anything. You can make suggestions and maybe guide them with some information and things of that sort. But right, like I said, mine was completely different into this. It was ketamine. I was on a ton of SSRIs. There's some people that they can go sit for, one mushroom ceremony and boom, that's all the answers they needed. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer for any of this. I would just say, do your research, dive into John Hopkins studies, Stanford studies, go follow David, there's all kinds of people out there online that have really good content and a really strong understanding of this stuff. And I think you got to do that first. You just got to do the right research.
Roger that. Dave or
Yeah,
Rob? Dave?
I'm definitely with you that it's going to be individual to each person. But I think that there is a sort of overarching framework that applies to addressing these things. And number one is preparation. So that's the doing the research piece. That's the intention setting piece. That's the getting clarity on why am I here kind of piece. There's the experience itself. So whether that is taking a microdose each day, whether that's doing a 5 gram like heroic dose, whether that's the ayahuasca ceremony, ketamine clinic, whatever, we have the actual experience itself. And ideally you have some tools that you've worked on to help kind of guide that process, or at least be able to work with that. So, maybe you practice some box breathing so that if you start to freak out during your mushroom trip, you've got something to come back to. So that's the experience. And then there's the integration, which is, what do I do now? So I did 5 grams of mushrooms, or I microdose for a month. How am I going to actually implement this stuff in my life so that I'm not the same person I was beforehand? So that is going to look different for each person. There's going to be different practices that fall under that, each of those categories. But that's the kind of framework that I look at all this stuff with, is preparing for the experience itself, and integrating afterwards. And maybe we can dive into each, or I don't know where you want to go from there, but that's how I think about it.
Raj.
There is another piece, and maybe David is too humble to state it, or maybe he was busy giving us the solid crack him out of the park points. But I feel that the most important aspect is, if you're lucky enough before you start any of those 3 steps to meet a guide, I believe that a guide is the most important aspect of this entire journey. Call the guide an angel, call it a mentor, call it a guide, call it a blind man standing at an intersection pointing in the right direction. Call it what you want. But I think you should seek a guide.
I like that. Rob, you got any thoughts so far?
Yeah, I do. And actually, it's going to lead me to a question for Chad and David on this one. And I'm going to touch on a bunch of points. So exactly what you said, Shaun, like a guide seems to be pretty important when I think about this topic. If I try to use the words context and safety, the things we've been talking about, I mean, I'm wondering, like, do you guys still run into the prevalence of people having difficulty disassociating the word, say like the topic of like magic mushrooms or like ketamine from like, oh, that means you're some sort of Colombian drug lord, like, the context, the societal context. Like, I mean, again, we all, probably everybody in this room understands that there are medical uses for cocaine And that's not like a bunch of like guys on Wall Street like buying an 8 ball for the weekend, right? Like they're two worlds apart, right? So like I wonder if you like have you guys run into that? Like how do you guys deal with somebody, right? And the safety aspect, I started me thinking like, how many people are totally interested in watching something like this to learn about psychedelics, but they're too afraid of what Grandma Susie's going to think about this medical treatment. And what they do is they secretly take it into the home without guidance, without proper context, right? Like, have you guys run into that? It's just a curiosity question.
Chad, you can go give it a start.
Yeah, I mean, I run into it a lot. From my wife's parents hammering us to close friends. And I just kind of look at them and it's like, man, if I'm not proof in the pudding for you, I don't know what is. I was on a ton of SSRIs and pharmaceuticals. I was a drinker. I was 60 pounds overweight. I wasn't very active. I was lethargic. I was angry, and I'm a completely different person than I was 3 years ago. So I just look at people and say, hey man, like if I'm not a little bit of proof in the pudding and you've known me for 5+ years, then I don't know what else I need to do to convince you. I've directed people to documentaries. I've directed people to, certain foundations and retreats. I've told people about, John Hopkins studies and reports on that. And it's same kind of thing, right? Like you can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink it. Right. So at a certain point, like I don't even have conversations with people anymore if I know which route they're already going. It's just kind of a knuckles and hay piece because I'm not going to convince them anyway, right? They've got to figure that out on their own. But yeah, I run into it probably daily.
Dave?
It's interesting you say that, Chad. I feel like from who I've met in the veteran community, especially, they're usually pretty open-minded because I think they see the results. And that kind of speaks for itself. I am also sure there's a whole lot of confirmation bias on my end that I just don't interact with people who aren't into it. Because if you're not into it, you're not following my Instagram page and you're not messaging me about it. So that probably plays a key role in the positive interactions that I get to have.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's the mental Joe, average Joe, right? I run into a lot of the average Joes that don't know about this stuff, but they're the guy that'll pound a 24-pack of Coors Light on a Saturday, wake up with a hangover on Sunday, and life's supposed to be peachy, right? So I guess that's where I come from. That context is I'm out there and I run into people. And what was really cool at the MAPS conference is people coming up to our booth and talking to us that were lawyers, doctors, psychiatrists, and they all were very pleasantly new to the space, but they wanted to learn, they wanted to educate because they see where this is going with mental health. So it's a battle for sure, but same thing. I just try to give them the information to people I can and allow them to, hopefully they'll go research and expand their own consciousness by learning this stuff.
One thing you said, sorry to cut you off, Chance. One thing you said is like the proof is in the pudding, kind of like, look at who I am and you can't deny it's been a beneficial thing. That's what I always tell people when they ask me, like, I've had my experience. I know how much this has helped me. How do I tell my friends about this? How do I tell my mom about this? Because people who have experienced this, usually the first reaction is like, oh my God, everyone needs this. And the best way that I think is just like Chad said, you have to be undeniable. Like someone needs to look at you and know that you've improved in every single capacity because of these experiences. So Chad, the best thing that you can possibly do to convince somebody is say, hey, look at my past. Look at when I was suicidal. Look at when I was depressed. Look at when I was drinking. And look at me now. I'm an amazing father. I have a company. I'm learning guitar. Like you cannot deny that these things have had an effect. I think that that's the best way to change people's mind is just to be more vocal about that and kind of show it, which means that we have to show our vulnerability and show the dark places too. But that's been my experience.
And I say too, it's like, when people ask those questions, it's like, I can't heal you. Right. But I can show you how I healed myself and how I'm healing myself and what my roadmap looks like. But I can't heal you, but I can only guide you and give you some information. So, yeah, I think we beat that dead horse. But yeah, I'm with you on that.
I haven't beat the dead horse quite enough yet. I beat it a bit more, and I'm going to beat it into people's heads with what I'm about to say. So bear with me. I did something interesting. It's titles. At a point in the past, it was everything was happening in the in the back alleys, in the shadows. No one was like talking about it because it was illegal or it was this or it was frowned upon. It wasn't so societally acceptable. And then in your commentary there, you said, but like doctors and lawyers and psychiatrists were coming up to us. I choose them because they are titles that are considered as, oh, that's not your average customer, we'll call it, nor is a tier one operator. And so I found it interesting that when I started talking about this long before you all existed, people would look at me and say what? You did what? A guy like you did that? And that's funny, right? Because who am I like that? What, doctor, psychiatrist, you're one guy? What are all these stupid labels? They're dumb labels. We're all just human beings, man, on a path, on a journey, trying to do our best or not do our best. Now it's my job, it's our job to help people understand that ditch the labels. Just stand in the now and figure out if you want to be better or not. And if you want to be better, then open your mind up to alternative modalities. So I do have experience in psychedelics, and I do appreciate that they benefit. And by me saying that it's cool to consider these kind of things, it's cool to start connecting with gods. It's cool to find your angel, whatever you language works best for all of the doctors, lawyers, and psychiatrists out there. Find a way to move forward with a guide and become more awesome.
Yeah. It actually goes into something that you say quite regularly. Deeds, not words, right? How do you convince people things work? Do them. Show them that they work. And again, you know, I've said this quite a bit in terms of how we've developed the collective, and my own journey and path is that there's proof of concept, right? These certain things work, right? The reason people are talking about sleep right now is because it's an issue. And the thing that is more than just the fact that it's an issue, sleeping, taking care of your sleep works. Right? And you can see it in the people that actually take care of their sleep. You can see that exercise works, and it works because you can see it in the people that do it, right? And so I'm just going to say that one more time. Deeds, not words, right? If you want to convince somebody of anything, do it. Don't just talk about it. Actually do it. Now we got a little bit of time here, but Dave, I did want to get into one of the points that you had brought up was not just the pre and then the journey, it was the integration. And I wanted to kind of take our last 10 minutes there and kind of spend some time on the integration, on how to utilize what you learned during the journey into your everyday life.
Yeah.
So give us that rundown.
Cool. First, I'm also going to preface this. After I'm done speaking, I'm probably going to smoke my tobacco pipe a little bit. So I'm not smoking crack or something. I just want to put that out there. So the integration piece, to me, if we're going to tie it back to like a jiu-jitsu analogy, if you go to a seminar and you learn some cool move and the guy's like, oh, hey, every time you try the sweep, you fail because you put your foot here when it should be here. You're like, cool, got it, Roger, thanks. If you go back and you roll the next day and you make that same mistake, you put your foot in the same place you used to, your jiu-jitsu hasn't improved whatsoever. You went to a cool seminar, but you're the same guy. So likewise, doing any sort of psychedelic experience is going to open your eyes to a lot. You're going to learn a lot of lessons. You're probably going to be shown a lot of things that you should be improving. And if you don't go and improve any of that, if you don't go and actually take action on anything, you haven't changed. You just had a crazy experience that one time. And unfortunately, we see this a lot nowadays with the emergence of this stuff, where people just seek more and more experiences. They just keep going back to the ketamine clinic without making changes, or they keep tripping without integrating anything. And I think it was Terrence McKenna had a good quote that's, once you get the message, hang up the phone. So once you've had this experience and gotten the message, don't go back for more until you've put into practice the things that you have been shown. So how that actually works, again, it's going to be different for everybody. For a lot of people, it looks like open-ended journaling about the experiences to try to distill down some of those lessons. It looks like changing your habits and your lifestyle behaviors to start to live a little bit better. It's going to look like changing the way that you show up in relationships maybe setting more clear boundaries. And if you know that there's something toxic in your life, cutting it out. And that's going to be painful if that's your mother or your best friend. It's going to look, again, different to each person. It's not going to be easy, but integration is the way that you actually change as a person because of this. It is the process of not making the same mistake every single time. It's the process of not being the person whose life got you to the point where you needed healing. So I think in a lot of ways, it's actually the most important part of all of this, because it's how we wrap all these lessons up and go forward. And it doesn't mean that you integrate everything. It doesn't mean every question's been answered. But now, after this integration process, kind of that's your new baseline for you to prepare for the next one. So, I've done ayahuasca, I don't know, 5 or 6 times now, like 5 or 6 weeks of ceremony. It's not like I did anything wrong because I didn't get anything the first time. I've gotten a lot. It's just each time I've leveled up, and that's become my new baseline.
I like that.
Awesome. I do have a question. I do love learning over here. And so the question that I'm going to ask, I have no experience in, and I've never thought to research it. It's never entered my brain until about a couple of minutes ago. And it was, and I'd be remiss not to create an analogy over here. And so you'd mentioned the BJJ mat. Someone put your foot there, put your foot there, put your foot there. 10 BJJ sessions in a row. The individual fails to keep putting the foot in the right spot. Eventually, an instructor is going to stop saying it. They're just going to shrug their shoulders and say, that student isn't listening. And they won't just keep repeating, put your foot there. And so using that analogy straight into the psychedelic world, more specifically, maybe because I'm not overly familiar with ketamine, but into the psilocybin or into the ayahuasca world, have you found in your experience, David, that at some point, 5, 10, 20, 30 sessions into it, perhaps, that the medicine stops providing the lesson that you require? I don't consider psilocybin, or more correctly, I don't consider the plant medicine world like ayahuasca and etc. as an inanimate object. I don't think it's just a chemical. I don't think it's just molecular bonds attaching to our molecular bonds. I think of it as a much more spiritual thing than that. And so if we were to give it a entity consideration, do you feel that entity at some point, or have you observed or heard that the entity at some point just shrugs its shoulders and kind of doesn't pass the lesson that's deserved?
I think what happens, just like you're not drilling with a grappling dummy, maybe you're drilling with that black belt, and he gives you an opportunity to sweep him. And if you fail and you put your foot in the wrong spot, he's going to choke the crap out of you to punish you and teach you a lesson. And say, hey, I served this up to you and you didn't do it. And I've told you 1,000 times and you didn't do it. And you're going to pay for it now because you need a little painful reminder to show you why. In my experience, that can be what happens, especially when people are working with psilocybin repeatedly and not integrating their lessons. They're just going to get shown all of the worst parts of their life for 6 hours, and it's going to be really uncomfortable because that lesson is just going to keep being served up to you until you get it. So I don't think I've seen it get to the point where the medicine sort of shrugs its shoulders. I think I've seen that more, that like you're going to keep getting the same lesson served to you until you learn it. And the medicine might start to punish you for not doing it and coming back, right? Like you've got the message, but you're still on the line. I think maybe with the ayahuasca, to use your terminology of like shrugging the shoulders, I do know some people who work with the medicine a lot and are still not amazing people, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I think at a certain point, maybe, yeah, they've kind of fallen into this self-delusion of thinking that they're making progress, but they're still repeating a lot of the same mistakes. So I do think that happens. And I think that happens with misguided people who aren't approaching this the right way, who are approaching it out of a sense of ego, out of a sense of fulfilling some sort of need that they have to be important or to be mystical or something like that. So I think the more common thing is to kind of get punished for like not integrating the lesson. So if you're coming at this in earnest, I don't think the medicine will shrug its shoulders to you. But if you're not coming to it in earnest, I think that can happen.
That's a great point. Rob, I know you got a tight timing here, so if you got to bounce, that's cool. But you got any?
I got a few extra minutes, yeah. Okay. And I think why I picked on earlier, I picked on the whole motivation thing. I didn't really mean to trash anybody who's making motivational content, but like, I think it's similar to what you just said, David, right? Like this idea that like, you'll find that there's this common trait of humans, I guess, those who aren't ready to do any hard work or any, deep introspection and integration of lessons learned, right? Like same, I think, reason why people go down that motivation rabbit hole. Like you watch your little moto clips day one and you're like, yeah, I'm super motivated on a Tuesday, but you don't really change anything. You're not really integrating anything. Now, the one key difference I would say, I think, which to me, standing as an outsider to that sort of personality type, right? You introduce things like mushrooms and stuff. I think you're absolutely right, man. Like the universe itself, like on a day-to-day level, if you're not integrating life lessons, you're probably going to find yourself in some like increasingly intense negative reward systems in general day-to-day life. But that's like waking reality. Like the worst thing I could ever think of is like, oh, I'm just going to go to a mushroom retreat repeatedly because really what I like doing is mushrooms and not actually fixing myself. And then the ultimate like sort of gotcha is like, man, I've seen some bad trips on mushrooms. Like, luckily, again, like I know who I am. I've never had any bad ones, but like I've seen friends like literally want to melt into the floor. You know what I mean? Like to do that for 6 hours just because you are unwilling to integrate that lesson is funny, but also tragic to me, I guess,
Yeah, 100%. Chad, you got any thoughts?
No, spot on. I love it all.
Yeah. I was going to say that this is, it goes not just with psychedelics, but in everyday life. And I've said it before that I had this little interesting epiphany. We used to say this thing in the military. We heard this a lot was the beatings will continue until morale improves. Right. And I would always giggle and I would think it was a joke and yeah, okay. They're just going to keep beating on us until we smile about it, until I heard it a different way. And it was the lessons will be repeated until they are learned. And that for some reason made it click into my head that yes, they are going to keep the beatings up until we put a smile on our face, because it's not about the beatings. It's not about the lessons. It's about how you are dealing with it. And in terms of therapy, in terms of getting better, in terms of mental health or physical health, that's going to happen, right? You're going to be served up lessons in life throughout your life. And if you don't apply the lesson learned, they're going to happen again and again and again. And we're in that, it's not just the retreats for psychedelics. I see this a lot in, I called them vetcations for a while. There's lots of veteran retreats that you see the same people going to over and over and over and over again. And it's not because they're trying to fix anything. It's because, oh, it's a cool trip. Oh yeah, I'd love to go climb that mountain. Ooh, that'd be cool. Like it's not free. It's being paid for, right? So that's something
it's free because it's paid for, and it's free in their mind because they're not doing the work. The whole thing is free. And man, if there's one thing that I am not a fan of, is the free ride. We all have to pay a price. We all have to feel the sting. We all have to face some form of adversity in order to grow. And if you're on the free ride, congratulations, you're on the wrong ride. So now that you've heard that, come on over and start doing a bit of hard work, start sweating a little bit, start getting to work on yourself, start actually improving.
Yeah, 100%. Now we are just a bit over time here, and I know Rob's got to run, so I'm going to put you up first, Rob. Any final thoughts on anything we've gone over today?
No, like this was a great one for me because like, I'm sort of in learning mode with all this stuff, right? Like, obviously I've got some thoughts about it, but like getting, to ask my questions and to hear from the experiences of all of you guys on the panel, like has been phenomenal. So I'm also a safety guy, so big ups on us talking about safety this time. So yeah, it was a great combo. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go, Dave.
Sure. I'll put a bow on everything that we talked about if I can. Prepare for the experience, know what you're getting yourself into, have a clear vision of the future you want for yourself and understand what needs to improve. Have the experience, do it safely, have some tools ready to work with, and then integrate the experience by no longer being the same person who needed healing, by actually changing your life, changing your relationships, your behaviors, your patterns of thought. And you'll be well on your way if you approach it that way.
100%. Chad? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts. I think it just comes down to you have to put the work in. You got to be willing to change, but you got to put some work in. You can't just pop some mushrooms or go through a ketamine infusion and come on the other side and think everything's gonna be okay. You've got to put some work in, and you've got to face some demons, plain and simple.
Yeah, 100%. Shaun, final thoughts?
Yep. Why are you here? Why are you listening to this? Why do you exist? How are you helping all of us on this journey? If you don't have those questions front and foremost in your mind, start thinking them. Second question you should be asking yourself is, who's my guide? Am I my own guide? Well, if you're your own guide and you're lost, how does that work out? Now you're like an officer with a compass, totally lost. And so I would suggest this. Figure out why you're here, find a guide, get to work, move down the path of being a better human being.
Yeah, 100%. It really, we've harped on this now twice for 2 shows, but it comes back to this, is that it is work. If you want to be better, it is going to be difficult. Well, I can't say difficult. Let me rephrase that. It's going to be taxing, right? It will cost something in order to be better. So as we all learn what that cost is, that means we can build upon ourselves to be able to pay it and then grow into the person that we are meant to be. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see you all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.